never believed that ordinary people could hide something truly evil. When I was 12 years old, I thought monsters only existed in horror movies. My biggest worries were finishing homework, beating my friends in video games, and convincing my parents to let me stay up past 10. That changed during the fall of 2012. Even after all these years, there are nights when I wake up sweating because I can still hear the sound that came from that basement. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't crying. It was something much worse. It sounded like someone desperately trying not to scream. Back then, my family lived in a quiet neighborhood outside a small town in Pennsylvania. Nothing exciting ever happened there. Everyone knew each other. Kids rode their bikes until sunset. Parents left their garage doors open without worrying about thieves. It was one of those places where people believed nothing bad could happen. The family next door moved in during October. They had one son named Daniel. He looked about my age, maybe a year older. He was quiet during the first few weeks, but after school one afternoon, he noticed I was wearing an old wrestling t-shirt. "You watch wrestling too?" he asked. Within minutes, we were talking like we'd known each other for years. We spent every afternoon together after that. Daniel wasn't like the other kids. He didn't care about sports or parties. He loved horror movies, old VHS tapes, and abandoned places. To a 12-year-old version of me, he was the coolest kid I'd ever met. One Friday evening, Daniel asked if I wanted to spend the night at his house. His parents had already spoken to mine, and they agreed. I packed a backpack with clothes, snacks, and my favorite PlayStation game before walking next door. His mother greeted me with a warm smile. His father seemed friendly too. He joked around constantly and laughed louder than anyone I'd ever met. If someone had asked me that night whether I trusted them, I would have said yes without hesitation. Dinner was great. We watched an old action movie while eating pizza. Everything felt completely normal. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel's parents said they were going upstairs. His dad smiled before leaving the room. "You boys can stay up as late as you want." Then his smile disappeared for just a second. "But don't go into the basement." He said it so casually that I almost ignored it. Daniel nodded immediately. "Okay." His father looked directly at me. "I mean it." There was something different about his voice. It wasn't friendly anymore. It sounded like a warning. The moment they disappeared upstairs, I looked at Daniel. "What's in the basement?" He shrugged. "My dad collects old tapes." "That's it? And work stuff." "What kind of work?" "I don't know." "You've never been down there?" He hesitated before answering. "Only once." "What happened?" He got really angry. That surprised me. Everything I'd seen about his father suggested he was the type of guy who never got angry. Daniel lowered his voice. He said if I ever went down there again, he'd throw every wrestling tape I own into the trash. I laughed. "That's a weird punishment." He didn't laugh back. He wasn't joking. We stayed up playing video games until after midnight. Eventually, Daniel fell asleep on the floor beside the couch. I tried sleeping too. I couldn't. Whenever I stayed somewhere new, sleep never came easily. The house became completely silent until footsteps, slow, heavy, coming from upstairs. I checked the digital clock. 2:17 a.m. Daniel's bedroom door slowly opened. His father walked past the room without looking inside. He wasn't carrying a flashlight. He didn't turn on any lights. He simply walked down the hallway like he'd memorized every step. A few seconds later, I heard a door open, then another sound. Wooden stairs creaking. Basement stairs. He was going downstairs. I sat perfectly still. After another minute, I heard the basement door close. Silence returned. At first, I assumed he couldn't sleep. Maybe he wanted to grab something. Maybe he forgot something downstairs. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. He still hadn't come back upstairs. Then, I heard a television. Very faint. The sound traveled through the heating vent beside the couch. It sounded old, like one of those, VHS tapes with constant static. I smiled to myself. So that's where the wrestling tapes are. But then, another sound reached my ears. Not from the TV, not from upstairs, from the basement. A muffled voice, someone speaking, very quietly. Then another voice answered. I slowly sat up. Daniel was still asleep. I leaned closer to the floor vent. The voices became slightly clearer. I couldn't understand the words. Only that, there were at least 2 people talking, maybe 3. I frowned. That didn't make any sense. I thought only Daniel's parents lived here, so who else was in the basement? I stayed frozen beside the floor vent. The voices continued for another minute before everything went quiet again. Then, a loud, metallic clang echoed through the basement. It sounded like someone had dropped a heavy chain on the concrete floor. I glanced toward Daniel. He shifted slightly in his sleeping bag but never woke up. For a second, I considered waking him. Instead, curiosity got the better of me. I slowly stood up and stepped into the hallway. The house felt completely different at night. Every shadow looked darker. Every creak sounded louder. At the end of the hallway was the basement door. A thin line of light glowed beneath it. Someone was definitely down there. I carefully walked closer. The old wooden floor groaned beneath my feet. I froze. Nothing. The voices downstairs continued. I reached the basement door and placed my ear against it. The television was playing something with heavy static. Between bursts of white noise, I could hear a man talking. His voice sounded cheerful, almost excited. Then another sound interrupted him, a muffled cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to make my stomach tighten. I told myself it had to be coming from an old movie. Maybe one of those horror VHS tapes Daniel's dad collected. That explanation made sense. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. I slowly turned the doorknob. Locked. I let out the breath I didn't realize I was holding. Maybe it was better that way. As I turned to walk back, the television suddenly went silent. Every sound from the basement stopped, even the footsteps. For a few terrifying seconds, there was absolute silence. Then, knock. One slow knock came from the other side of the basement door. I stared at it. Another knock, this time louder, then a third. Not random, perfectly spaced apart. Someone, or something, was standing directly behind the door. I took several steps backward. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears. Then I heard Daniel's father's voice. "Everything okay up there?" His voice sounded completely normal. I swallowed hard. Yeah, I thought I heard someone. I couldn't sleep. A few seconds passed. Then he laughed. "Go get some rest." His footsteps moved away from the door. A minute later, I heard him climbing the basement stairs. I ran back to the living room just before he appeared in the hallway. He looked at me for a moment, smiled. "Still awake?" "Yeah." "Too much soda?" I nodded. He laughed again and headed upstairs as if nothing had happened. But something about that smile felt different now. It looked forced, almost practiced. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Daniel's dad was making pancakes while humming an old country song. He acted exactly like he had the day before, cheerful, friendly, funny. If I hadn't been awake the previous night, I would have thought I imagined everything. During breakfast, I casually asked, "So, what were you watching downstairs last night?" His fork stopped halfway to his mouth, only for a second. Then he smiled. "Old wrestling tapes. I thought I heard people talking." He chuckled. "Some of those old interviews get pretty loud." That answer sounded reasonable, but Daniel looked confused. "Dad, you watched wrestling?" His father looked at him. "Couldn't sleep." Daniel frowned. "You never watch wrestling anymore." His dad laughed. Guess I was feeling nostalgic. The conversation ended there, but something felt off. Later that afternoon, Daniel's father left the house to pick up groceries. His mother was upstairs taking a nap. Daniel was showing me his wrestling action figures when I noticed something. His dad's key ring. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, right next to the car keys. I stared at the small brass key hanging from the ring. It looked older than the others. Without saying anything, I pointed toward it. Daniel immediately shook his head. "No." "What?" "I know what you're thinking. I'm just curious." "So am I." He lowered his voice. But every time Dad leaves, he takes those keys. I looked back toward the counter. This time, he forgot. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The entire house was silent. Finally, I whispered, "We'll just look." Daniel looked terrified. "Oh, we won't touch anything." He kept staring toward the stairs, worried his mom might wake up. After nearly a minute, he sighed. 5 minutes. No more. I grabbed the key ring from the counter. Together, we slowly walked toward the basement door, and this time, we had the key. Daniel stood beside me, breathing so quietly that I could barely hear him. I slid the old brass key into the lock. Click. The deadbolt turned. Neither of us moved. It felt like the house itself was warning us not to go any farther. I slowly opened the basement door. A wave of cold, damp air drifted up the stairs. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, old wood, mold, and something metallic. Something that reminded me of rusty tools. The basement light was already on. At the bottom of the stairs sat an old television on a rolling cart with a VCR underneath it. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of VHS tapes. Every single one had a handwritten label. WWF 1991, Royal Rumble 1992, SummerSlam 1994. Just like Daniel had said, it looked like an incredible wrestling collection. For a moment, I almost forgot why we came down there. Daniel smiled nervously. "I told you, my dad's obsessed." I nodded while scanning the shelves. Everything looked normal until I noticed one section. About 20 tapes sat on a separate shelf. Unlike the others, they didn't have wrestling names. Each one simply read, Tape 1, Tape 2, Tape 3. No dates, no descriptions, just numbers. I picked up Tape 9. It felt heavier than the others. Daniel frowned. "I've never seen those before." "Maybe they're home videos." "Then why hide them?" Neither of us had an answer. I looked toward the television. The VCR was already plugged in, almost as if someone had used it recently. "I just want to see what's on one." Daniel grabbed my arm. "We shouldn't. It'll take 10 seconds. Before he could stop me, I pushed the tape into the VCR. The machine swallowed it with a loud mechanical click. Static filled the screen. Then, the picture appeared. At first, it showed an empty room. The walls were painted dark red. There was only one wooden chair in the middle. Nothing else. The camera never moved. It was perfectly still. For almost 30 seconds, nothing happened. Daniel laughed nervously. "See? It's probably nothing." Then, a voice echoed through the TV speakers. Not from the camera, from somewhere behind it. A calm male voice said, "Begin." A few seconds later, someone walked into frame. Only their legs were visible. They were dragging something across the floor. I couldn't see what it was. Then, the screen suddenly filled with heavy static. The image disappeared, but the audio kept playing. Footsteps, a chair scraping across the floor. Then, a frightened voice whispered, "Up, please." My entire body froze. Daniel lunged forward and pressed the eject button. The tape slid out. Neither of us spoke. The basement suddenly felt much colder. "What?" Daniel whispered. "Was that?" Before I could answer, we heard it, a car door closing outside. Daniel's face lost all color. "My dad." We looked at each other, then at the tape. I had forgotten to put it back. Panic hit both of us at once. I shoved the tape onto the shelf as fast as I could, not where it originally was, just somewhere close. We ran toward the basement stairs. Halfway up, the front door slammed shut upstairs. Daniel's father was home. His voice echoed through the house. "Boys?" Neither of us answered. We quietly closed the basement door behind us. I placed the key ring back on the kitchen counter exactly where I'd found it. For one brief second, I thought we'd gotten away with it. Then Daniel's father stepped into the hallway. He wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes moved from me to Daniel, then slowly toward the basement door. He didn't say a word. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, picked up the keys, looked at the brass basement key for several seconds, then looked back at us. Finally, he smiled. But this wasn't the warm smile I'd seen all weekend. It was cold, empty, calculated. He spoke so softly I almost didn't hear him. "So, you boys stayed out of the basement, right?" Daniel couldn't even look at him. I forced myself to nod. "Yeah." He kept staring at us for what felt like forever. Then he quietly said, "Good. I'd hate for either of you to see something you could never forget." At that moment, I knew he wasn't talking about wrestling tapes. After that conversation, the atmosphere inside the house completely changed. Daniel's father went back to acting cheerful, but neither of us believed it anymore. He cracked jokes during dinner. He laughed louder than anyone else at the table, but every few minutes, I'd catch him looking at us, not speaking, just watching, as if he was waiting for one of us to admit something. I barely touched my food. Daniel looked even worse. His hands were shaking so badly that he dropped his fork twice. His mother noticed. "Honey, are you feeling okay?" Before Daniel could answer, his father smiled. "He's probably just tired." His eyes never left Daniel. That smile sent a chill down my spine. Around 8 that evening, my parents called to check on me. When I picked up the phone, my mom asked if I wanted to stay another night. Normally, I would have said yes. This time, I wanted to leave immediately. But Daniel was standing nearby, silently begging me not to say anything. I didn't know if he was scared of being left alone or scared of what his father might do if I suddenly wanted to leave. So I lied. "I'll stay." It became one of the biggest mistakes of my life. Later that night, everyone went to bed. Daniel whispered from his sleeping bag, "I don't think those tapes were movies." "I know." My dad lied. "I know." After several seconds of silence, he asked something that still haunts me. "What if those voices were real?" I didn't answer because deep down, I already believed they were. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I woke to a strange sound. The living room was dark, the television was off. At first, I thought I had imagined it. Then I heard it again. Click, a door opening, slow footsteps. Not upstairs, not outside, inside the hallway. I carefully lifted my head. A faint light was coming from beneath the basement door. Someone was down there again. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Daniel's sleeping bag was empty. I sat upright instantly. "Daniel?" No answer. I quietly walked into the hallway. The basement door was slightly open, just enough for light to spill across the floor. From below, I heard Daniel's father's voice, calm, soft. "You have to understand, some things should never be shared." Another voice answered. It was Daniel. "Dad, please." I slowly crept toward the stairs. Every instinct told me to run. Instead, I looked through the narrow opening. Daniel was standing at the bottom of the stairs. His father stood in front of the old television. One of the numbered VHS tapes was inside the VCR. The screen showed nothing but static. His father noticed movement. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at me. Neither of us spoke. For several long seconds, we simply stared at each other. Then, he smiled. Not the fake, friendly smile. Not the forced dinner smile. A completely different smile. Cold, emotionless. He raised one finger and pointed toward the stairs. "Go back upstairs." His voice was almost a whisper. I couldn't move. Then he took one slow step toward me. I said, "Go." Every survival instinct I had finally kicked in. I turned and sprinted toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Daniel shouting my name. Then, the basement door slammed shut with enough force to shake the entire house. I never looked back. Barefoot and still wearing my pajamas, I ran all the way home. My parents called the police after hearing my story. Officers searched the house before sunrise. They found nothing unusual. The basement was spotless. The television was unplugged. The numbered tapes were gone. Daniel's father calmly explained that I'd had a nightmare after watching horror movies. His wife supported his story. Daniel never said a single word. 2 days later, the family disappeared. The house went up for sale less than a week later. No goodbye, no moving truck, nothing. It was as if they had never lived there. Years passed before I searched for Daniel online. There were no school records after that year, no social media, no graduation photos, nothing. The only proof he ever existed is an old class photo sitting in a box at my parents' house. Sometimes I take it out, just to remind myself that I didn't imagine him. I still don't know what was really on those tapes, and I don't want to know. But every now and then, I'll wake up around 2:17 a.m. in the silence. I can almost hear the faint sound of VHS static, and for just a second, I wonder if somewhere, someone is still recording the next tape.